Krite Vishwaguru Brahma Tritayam Munisattam Dvapare Vyasasya Kaluvatra Bhavaimham Shankara. Shankara said, in the Satya Yuga, Brahma, the creator, was the Guru. All four Vedas came from his lips. He was the teacher. In the Treta Yuga, Vasishtha was the Guru. In Dwapara, Vyasa was the Guru. And in this Kali Yuga, I am the Guru. I am the teacher. What he taught? Vedanta, the Vedas. Mass of knowledge, wisdom of the Vedic Aryan sages. So that Vedantic tradition coming from the very dawn of civilization. And now we are carrying the same ancient message. Today we are observing Shankara's birthday anniversary. His actual birthday was on last Friday. But generally we observe on Sunday. And we are very happy that Swami Tattwamayananda, head of the Vedanta Society of Northern California, San Francisco, is our guest speaker. And he will speak Shankara's contribution to the world. I think I said the right thing. Shankara's contribution to the world thought. Without Shankara, it is hard for us to imagine Vedanta. He lived only 32 years. But his contribution is immense. So Swami will speak, Swami Tattwamayananda will speak on this important subject. And I'm very happy that he agreed to come. Thank you.
ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करम्। My pranams to Swami Chaitananda Ji Maharaj and my namaskar to Swami. The new Swamiji was recently arrived, and also my greetings and namaskar to all the Swamijis, Nishpabhananda Ji and Niragarananda Ji and all the friends who have assembled here. As Swamiji was mentioning in his introduction that, we cannot think of Vedanta without thinking of Shankaracharya. I shall say a few things about Shankaracharya's background, the time when he emerged and his contribution, and the relevance of some of his thoughts to our own times. You know, Shankara was born, according to most of the historians, around 778 AD, and he passed away in the year 810 AD. It's only 32 years. If you can imagine the amount of work he did within this short lifespan of 32 years. There are many, many statements from different saints and scholars who have summed up Shankaracharya's contribution and the relevance of his thought to our times. Maybe the most telling estimate is from Sister Nivedita. She talks about Shankaracharya's contribution. She talks about a monk who started his monastic career when he was less than 7 years old, born somewhere in the northwestern part of Indian subcontinent, walked 1,300 miles when he was just less than 7 years old in search of his guru, and met his guru in a place called Omkareshwar, wrote the most profound philosophical classics in Sanskrit language, wrote the most profound devotional poetry in Sanskrit language. For your information, according to many scholars and specialists in literary criticism in Sanskrit literature, Shankaracharya is ranked as a much greater poet than Kalidasa. But because he wrote so many classical works on philosophy, he is known more as a philosopher than as a poet. In fact, if you go to any of the great temples of India, you can find Shankaracharya had written some devotional poem on the presiding deity of any temple. If you go to extreme north Badrinath, extreme south Kanyakumari or Kanchipuram, extreme west Dwaraka in the Saurashtra coast, and Tripureshwari in the extreme east. So you find this boy of less than 7 years old who became a monk before he reached his 7th year, finished all his great commentaries on philosophy before he was 16th year, and then passed away in the year when he was just about 32, and is the founder of no less than 10 monastic orders in the world. If you think of San Francisco, you think of St. Francis of Assisi, who is the founder of the Franciscan order. Ignatius Loyola was the founder of the Jesuit order. Shankaracharya founded 10 monastic orders. In addition to writing the most profound philosophical classics in Sanskrit language, more than 65 poems is praising, extolling different deities, Shiva, Vishnu, and so on. And there is a poem, in fact. It says like this: Shaivam cha Vaishnavam chaiva Shaktam Vainayikam tatha Skantam cha Bhakti Margasya Dasanani Shadevahi. It is called Shanmadasthapakacharya, means 6 deities, 6 concepts of personal worship. Shankaracharya is the founder of Advaita system, which considers that the highest idea of God is one nirguna, niragara, nirvishesha, means attributeless, formless, transcendental reality. Attributeless in the sense, the absolute reality which cannot be defined in terms of attributes. Formless doesn't mean devoid of form, beyond form, transcending the limitations of names and forms and definitions and descriptions. Those of you who are familiar with Christian theology the closest approximation to Shankaracharya's concept of Advaita is Meister Eckhart, who openly said that the absolute reality cannot even be defined in terms of the Holy Trinity. God, Holy Ghost, God, Son and Holy Ghost. Cannot be. Father, Son and Holy Ghost. The absolute reality is beyond description, beyond definition, is non-definable, non-describable, indescribable. And 500 years before Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, who lived in the 13th century Germany, was a Dominican priest, Shankaracharya had already explained absolute reality as the one who is beyond description, beyond definition, beyond words. Pancha Shabda Pravritti Nishedha. That's a technical term used in Vedantic terminology. Means the absolute reality which cannot be verbalized in terms of words or definitions and descriptions. So, while describing the absolute reality as one all-pervading, immanent, transcendental reality, he was also explaining how to worship that God in its aspect with form. That's an important thing. So the Shanmata Sthapaka means the highest reality can be worshipped as Shiva, Vishnu, Skanda, that means Kumara or Subramanya, and then of course Shakti, Surya, and so on. In fact, one of his signal contributions, which is not frequently remembered, is, he actually organized and systematized the concept of deities from the Vedic tradition. If you look at the Vedic tradition, Rigveda, you find there are innumerable deities. You may say Indram, Mitram, Varunam, Agnirahu, Atho Divyasa, Suparno Garutman, Ekam Satvipra, Begudha Vadanti, Agnim Yamamatari, Shwanamaho. This comes in the Rigveda Samhita, the first mandala. It is a first statement on Advaita Vedanta. The first statement, scriptural, a doctrinal statement in Advaita Vedanta, comes from Rigveda Samhita. Ekam Sat Vipraha Begudha Vadanti. The reality is one, but sages try to understand, define, and explain and realize that absolute reality in so many different ways. Incidentally, this is also the final foundation for interfaith dialogue, in fact. So anyway, that's a different subject which I'll come to later. So the point is, Shankaracharya took all these concepts of different deities from Rigveda Samhita and systematized under 6 traditions of worship. Today, if we go to India, in a typical Indian household, and of course now it is happening all over the world, wherever Vedanta is understood and respected and practiced. Now, you find in a typical Hindu household, there will be a shrine. In that shrine, there may be 1, 2, or maybe all the 5 of different deities. It is called the Panchadevata Puja. Adityambigam Vishnum Gananatham Maheshwaram Panchayajna Baro Nityam Grihastha Panchapujayet. So when you define God as one transcendental formless reality, it is a high ideal floating somewhere in the sky. But you need a stepping stone to enter that path of spiritual evolution. For that, you have to conceive of one or other idea of God. You remember in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the beginning of the Gospel, the chronicler Mahendranath Gupta, it's an interesting dialogue. So Sri Ramakrishna asks Yam, how do you worship God? How do you understand God, with form or without form? Then Yam says, okay, I rather prefer the idea of God without form. Guru Maharaj says, but that's okay, but don't think that's the only approach. That's the only way. You should not be fanatical. Now, what Shankaracharya did was, on the one hand, he expounded Vedanta philosophy, writing commentaries on the 10 Upanishads, Isha, Vasikena, Katha, Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka, and so on. Aitareya, Mundaka, Mandukya, and so on. Taittiriya. And Gita and Brahma Sutras. He wrote commentaries on what is called Prasthanatraya, triple foundations of Vedanta philosophy, mostly based on the Upanishads, which are the essence, which constitute the essence of Vedas or Vedic philosophy. He also gave it a practical shape. Every ordinary person living in his household, rearing his families, living the normal life of an householder, can practice Vedanta by doing worship to Shiva, Vishnu, Maheshwara, and so on. That's called Panja Yajna. Panja Yajna Baro Nityam Grihastha Panja Pujit. So if you go to India or anywhere where Hinduism is practiced, if a Grihastha goes to nearby Shiva temple, Vishnu temple, or Ganapati temple, Mother, Divine Mother, Kali temple, any temple, actually he is actually practicing Advaita. Because if you sincerely practice devotion in one tradition, you can reach the top of the mountain. If you can take the first step in the ladder, then one day you will reach the top of the hill. There is no doubt about it. If you board the bus, one day you will reach your destination. So what Shankara did was, on the one hand, he built up this unique philosophical foundation of Vedanta, philosophical and spiritual foundation of Vedanta, by writing commentaries on the Upanishads, which constitute the essence of the Vedas, Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. And at the same time, he also opened a kindergarten. He built up a university. The great metaphysics of Upanishad philosophy is like a university, PhD. Postdoctoral. At the same time, he also opened a kindergarten where you can go and learn the alphabet, a primary school. Slowly you can evolve to this higher level of spiritual evolution. This is something very unique. And in addition to that, he walked all over India 4 times. The place he was born is known as Kaladi. In the vernacular, it means the food, the feet, the food that you use for walking. So actually he walked all over India. He went to all, with the extreme north, Badrinath, close to Chinese border, Indo-Tibetan border, right from the extreme south, extreme west in Saurashtra, extreme east in the Tripureshwari, that means beyond today's Bangladesh in Tripura. And 4 times. And in addition to that, he also founded 4 different monasteries in India. In the extreme south, in Sringeri, in the north, near Badrinath, is called Joshimath, in the west, Dwaraka, and in the east, Puri. And he installed his disciples in each of these monasteries and made them responsible for the preservation of each one of the 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda, and responsible for the propagation of each one of the 4 Mahavakyas. And then I will tell you a few things about the background in which Shankaracharya emerged. Now, Shankaracharya was born, as I mentioned, in 778 AD. There are 2 versions, 788 to 820, and the other version is 778 to 810, 32 years. So, Ashtame Chaduro Vedan Dwadase Sarvashastravid Shodase Kritavan Bhashyam Dvatrimse Munir Abhyagat. This is a famous statement frequently quoted from Shankara Digvijaya. There are a number of classical Sanskrit works, all in verses, extolling or describing Shankaracharya's biography. There it said, when he was 8 years old, there was nothing more for him to study. Today, if you go to India, you can find very old, often fat-bellied Brahmin Pandits with the long hairstyle, struggling with Vedas. One Veda, Rig Veda, Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad. Each of the one Veda, 4 Vedas got these 4 divisions. Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad. And they spent 40 years, 50 years mastering one Vedas. And the little boy had mastered all the 4 Vedas with all sections, plus Mahabharata. I remember Shankaracharya quotes not only from Vedas, he quotes from Mahabharata. Practically, there is not one single scripture that he doesn't refer to, that he doesn't quote from. And to an extent, I should give an example. Bhagavata Purana that you read today, which you have well known, is considered to be a later work because Shankaracharya doesn't quote from that book. That's the place of Shankaracharya. Practically, there is no branch of philosophy or literature or knowledge or scripture that he doesn't quote from. Now, what was the background that he was born? You can imagine, as I mentioned, 7th, 8th century AD. If you look at India's evolution, the evolution of Indian philosophy, incidentally, I have started a new series, the foundational texts of Indian philosophy, a series of classes, online classes, sponsored by the Stanford Students Association at their request. It's an academic program, already started last week onwards, so it's going on. Now, if you look at the evolution of Indian thought, on the one hand, 3rd millennium BC stands Lord Krishna, the author of the Gita. At the other end, in 19th century, the later half of 19th century, roughly speaking, stands Vivekananda. Of course, Vivekananda cannot and doesn't come alone without Sri Ramakrishna. So Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda phenomenon, 19th century, and Lord Krishna in the 3rd millennium BC. According to historians, the date for Mahabharata war is fixed somewhere 3200 BC. That's the date of the composition of Bhagavad Gita. And then Buddha, 6th century BC. And then Shankara, 8th century AD. Then Vivekananda, 19th century AD. So you have roughly, let's say, about 3,000, about 600, less than 6,000 years of evolution of Indian thought. In this process, you can find from Lord Krishna's times to Buddha's time. It's a very interesting period. Not much is known historically speaking about this period, except that Vedas, the Samhitas and Brahmanas and Upanishads, they were compiled, they became popular, they were studied and taught and commented upon by great Vedic commentators like Mahidhara, Bhattabhaskara and others. This is one period. The second phase, as I mentioned, is Buddha. And Buddha came in the 6th century BC. What Buddha did was, he just gave a humanistic interpretation of Vedanta. Never ever imagine that Buddha taught something other than Vedanta or something that is alien to Hinduism. What Buddha did was, he took the most humanistic aspects of Vedanta philosophy, taught in his own vernacular at that time, though he was a great scholar in Vedanta and Vedas, as he was, every prince used to be in those days. He taught in the vernacular, the Prakrit language, which was later on compiled in Pali canonical literature, Sutta Pedaka, Vinaya Pedaka, Abhidhamma Pedaka, which is called Tripedakas, which later again evolved into different channels like Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Vijnanavada, Sunyavada. So between Buddha and Shankaracharya, it was a very, very interesting period in the evolution of Indian thought. On the one hand, Buddha did not teach much metaphysics. On the other hand, Buddhism produced one of the most extensive literature in modern philosophy. So how do you understand this? If you look at the early Buddhism, which is canonical foundation in the Pali literature, that is Tripedakas, what you find is mostly very humanistic, very simple interpretation of how to live in this world, a happy, peaceful, simple life, practicing these 8 disciplines of right conduct, right practice, right speech. It is called samyak samadhi, samyak ajiva, samyak vak, samyak sattha, and so on. So finally, you can reach nirvana. I mean, you can live a happy, peaceful life in this world, then you can get out of this transmigratory cycle of samsara, this life. These are Buddha's teachings. He stopped there. Whenever somebody prompted him to speak very high on metaphysics, he rather avoided that temptation. But later on, from 2nd century BC up to 6th century AD, in about 800 years, Buddhism developed what can be called some of the most astounding philosophical schools of the world. Today, what you call mindfulness, actually, it is just a superficial interpretation of an idea that comes from Mahasatipatthana Sutta, or Satipatthana Sutta. It comes from Kuddhaka Nikaya. It is called Sutta Pitaka. So it is just based on a Pali discourse given by Buddha. So you can find 2 schools of Buddhism evolved, Mahayana and Hinayana. Mahayana produced both Vijnanavada and Shunyavada, and Hinayana produced Autrantika and Vaibhashika. 2 schools of realism, two schools of idealism. Now when Shankaracharya came, what was the situation? Buddha's original teachings were forgotten. Instead of that, all kinds of superstitious, total, sometimes even repulsive practices had emerged in many parts of India in the name of Buddhism. Remember, this actually did not happen to Buddhism outside Indian subcontinent. Buddhism had already traveled to China, eventually to Japan, into Central Asia, Sri Lanka and other places. But within Indian context, what happened was Buddhism degenerated into some kind of a life-negating idealism, very similar to a kind of extreme school of materialism. At that time, Shankaracharya emerged. What Shankara did, he had a lot of debates with Buddhism. Actually, Shankaracharya was not debating with Buddha. His debates were mostly with some schools of Buddhism which had nothing to do with the original teachings of Lord Buddha. This should be understood very clearly. So if you find in Shankaracharya's life, you find he tried to refute Buddhism. He was not refuting Buddha's teachings. Mostly he was refuting one school of Buddhism which is called Pravritti Vijnanavada, a kind of subjective idealism, which negated external world, which negated everything. It was a kind of very similar to a school of philosophy that developed in the mid-19th century Russia, kind of anarchism. Rejecting everything. So that was what Shankaracharya was trying to refute. So he had to refute many of the degenerate forms of Buddhism which had completely deviated from the real teachings of Lord Buddha. And then he had to debate with a kind of Mimamsa ritualism. Even within the Hindu fold, a lot of bohemian, highly utilitarian, very superficial ritualistic philosophical systems evolved. I can give one example that will give an idea of Shankaracharya's contribution. See, if you look at 20th century, especially after Vivekananda's introduction of Vedanta to America, you find a number of people in Western world reading Vivekananda's books, sometimes attracted by these high Vedantic ideas. They went to India. See, the well-known interpreter of Maharshi, this Ramana Maharshi, his name is Paul Brunton. He was an Englishman living in New York, and he read something about Advaita Vedanta, and straight away he went to Chennai, Tiruvannamalai. He met Lord Shankaracharya, the abbot of Kanchi Much, and he was directed to Ramana Maharshi, and eventually he became an Advaitin. Then he went to he went to India. He actually had a close encounter, very intimate conversation with Mahendranath Gupta, who was the chronicler of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And today if you go to Himalaya and ashramas, you find a lot of Westerners born in Jewish, Christian, non-Hindu traditions, all of them, with long hair, vibhutis, walking around. Everywhere you find, where are they going and what are they looking for? They're looking for Vedanta. If you talk to them about some kind of Ramanuja or Madhva system, they find we have all that plenty, even because Christianity itself has got a rich mystical tradition. So does Judaism. But nothing like Advaita. So they are going in search of something that is that defines God as a transcendental reality, God as the inner indweller in all living beings, God who can be understood and defined as an all-compassing divine spirit. Remember, Advaita, while defining the highest idea of God as a transcendental reality going beyond names and forms, it doesn't reject, it doesn't give up, it doesn't say no to other ideas. One of the most profound statements in the entire corpus of Shankaracharya's commentary, it comes in his commentary on the Mandukya Karika. The verse is, Susiddhanta vyavasthasu dvaitino nischida dridham parasparam viruddhyante taihi ayam na viruddhyate. This comes in the Mandukya Karika. It's called Gaudapada Karika. In the commentary, Shankaracharya says, Asmadiyoyam vaidigo dharma taihi na viruddhyate. Atmanaha ananyatvad. What he says is, Advaita Vedanta has no quarrel with anyone. Because Advaita Vedanta accepts that all religions, all paths are leading to the same goal. He cannot reject anyone because you cannot reject yourself. In the commentaries, in other commentaries, he says, Sukhastadvi pade saga, means you cannot hit your own head with your right hand. So if you reject any other religion, any other religious tradition, any other path, any other view, no, that's wrong. That's not the right path. You should come over to my religion. You are actually hitting your own head with your right hand. Who feels the pain? You feel the pain. So the entire world is one spiritual family. The idea that the whole humanity, not only humanity, the entire creation is one spiritual family. That is the signal contribution of Vedanta. Because Advaita accepts that the whole creation is one spiritual family. This oneness and unity of existence. That is the most important contribution of Vedanta to world thought. This idea, remember, this idea is not Shankaracharya's original contribution. We have to remember, these ideas did exist in the Vedic literature. But, Vedas are like forests. There are many things, many trees, many mountains, many valleys, many animals, all sorts of things you find. There is, for example, pantheism, pantheism, polytheism, monotheism, henotheism. All these are different terms used by Western Indologists in their attempt to understand and interpret different ideas of God in the Vedic literature. Originally, it goes to the credit goes to Max Muller. So, if you look at the Vedic literature, the Aranyaka, Samhita, Brahmana, Upanishad, you find so many ideas of God. What Shankara did, he took only the Upanishad portions and said that they constitute the essence of higher philosophy. Because in the Vedic literature, there are many ideas which are very pantheistic, more like immersions or more like the ideas you find in Walden, in Thoreau. I'm trying to connect somehow with them. contemporary American thought system. Walden moving from one place to another place, admiring the clouds and mountains and trees and ponds. You can find all that in Rigveda Samhita, you find. Gange Yamune Cheva Godavari Saraswati, all that you find in the Rigveda Samhita, you find. Yamamme Gange Yamune Saraswati Purushniya. You can find all these, you find the pantheism and pantheism in the Rigveda Samhita. What Shankaracharya did, he took up the most profound statements of the Vedic literature and he interpreted those statements in the light of Vedanta philosophy. And he said that wherever there is a conflict between the highest teachings of the Upanishads, which look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family, which is so universal, and other teachings, don't accept other teachings, you accept what the Upanishads teach. In fact, he quotes the well-known statement from the Jabara Smriti. He says, Sudhi Smriti Virodeshu Srudireva Giriyasi. What it means is, Avirodhetu Sadakaryam Smatam Vaidikavasada. Swami Vivekananda used to repeat again and again this idea. Wherever there is a conflict between the teachings of the Vedas, between the Upanishads, the Vedanta, and other teachings, you should accept what the Vedas teach you. You should not give much importance to other scriptures. These statements are coming from the authors of Smritis who tell you, don't take us literally or seriously. You completely don't bother about what we say when our statements contradict what the Vedas teach. And what do the Vedas teach? The Vedas teach that the whole humanity, the whole creation is one. It's the essence of Vedanta. So now remember, there is another interesting, it is related to Vedic theology. Before Shankaracharya, these Upanishads were not detached from Vedic literature. This is an important thing to remember. Before Shankaracharya, we didn't have compact manuscripts which contain only the Upanishads and Samhitas, Aranyakas. We didn't have. So he had studied all this and in his head he organized them all. This is an important contribution. Remember, before Shankaracharya there were commentaries, like Mahidhara and others had written commentaries on some portions of Vedic literature. But in those commentaries, whenever those commentators discussed mantras which are actually from Upanishads, they commented, they interpreted in very, very superficial, almost ridiculous manner. I can give an example. This may make sense only to those who know the background of what I am saying, but it's very important. For example, Aham Brahmasmi. You may have heard of this. It's a Mahavakya. I am Brahman. I mean, if you look upon yourself as looking beyond body-mind complex, then the Atman, the spark of the divine present in you, is the same as the universal absolute reality. Means that's the basis of this Vedantic universalism. So the Tattwamasi and Aham, Aham, Atma, Brahma, all the Mahavakyas are there. It's a different matter. If you have got doubt, you can ask during interaction. Now the point is, this Mahavakya, which is the most profound Mahavakya, the essence of the entire Vedanta philosophy is Aham Brahmasmi. I am non-different. I am the same as the absolute reality present everywhere. It doesn't mean that I am God. Sometimes people very foolishly interpret Vedanta tells you are God. No. What it says is, what is the underlying divine spark within you which makes you think, which makes you contemplate, which gives you all the energies and power. That is the divine spark which is present everywhere. That's the essence of it. Now, this Mahavakya was interpreted by pre-Shankarite Vedic commentators in a funny manner. They believed that the only purpose of Vedas is to go on performing rituals. Yajnas and yagas, they are called in Sanskrit. Vedic rituals, which means you go on performing some fire ceremonies with mantras, praying for number of children, lot of wealth, going to heavens, living a happy life in this world. More like, let me get a wonderful job, maybe the President of the United States. Always living in a 6-star hotel, having the most best paid job in the world, something like that. This was the only purpose of Vedas. This was the view of the traditional commentators who came before Shankara. For them, Aham Brahmasmi means I am praying to one deity and he will bless me with all these wonderful things. More like a little child asking for candies, chocolates, like that. Shankaracharya came. He said, you can ask for candies as long as you are children. But you grow up, you should not be asking for candies. Then you should be looking for something better. So he said, whenever you have gone beyond your desire for worldly enjoyments, then you have a right and a duty to renounce this world and look for higher values in life. So, before Shankaracharya, renunciation, mendicancy, sannyasa tradition was there, but again it was wrongly interpreted as a last refuge of people who can't do anything else in this world. He says, so he says, Brahmacharya deva, Brahmacharyat, Garhastyat, Vanaprastha deva sannyasaka. He made this statement. Any person who doesn't want to live a worldly life, who is not satisfied with worldly enjoyments, he can take to a life of renunciation. This was one of the signal contributions of Shankaracharya to Indian thought. Remember, the idea of renunciation is as old as the Vedas. Again, a lot of misunderstandings had taken place. As a result of Shankaracharya's interpretation of the Upanishad philosophy, it became well known that any person, anywhere in the world, no matter what religion you are born into or what nation or culture you belong to, you can take to this higher idea of life. Another important contribution of Shankaracharya was, and Swami Vivekananda actually repeats this, he emphasizes this point again, is the commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know how many of you may remember, we have no less than 18 Gitas actually, from Bhagavata Purana and also from Mahabharata. Vyadha Gita is from Mahabharata. It is much more profound than Bhagavad Gita, really speaking. If you look at Vyadha's instructions to the sage, it is much more profound. But because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, it became a universal spiritual classic. If Shankaracharya had not written a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, we won't be discussing Gita today. If Indian Prime Minister, if any great Indian visits the Pope, the only book he can present Pope with is a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. Because that's the representative scripture of India and Vedantic Hindu tradition. Now, this book became a universal spiritual classic just because Shankaracharya wrote a commentary. He himself says, Yadidam Gita Shastram Samasta Vedartha Sangraha Bhudam Durviknyayartham. Bhashikara himself makes a statement. This Gita contains the essence of the entire Vedic, Vedantic philosophy. And not only that, even the classification of the 3 parts given in the Gita into Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, you can find all these parts. Those who want to live a spiritual life through contemplation, they can do that. Those who want to spend their time meditating on God, they can do. Those who want to do puja, rituals, through devotion, they can do. Those who want to practice karma yoga, they also can do. Now, all these ideas are found in the Gita, in the original text, but a classification and description of all these you can find in the interpretation by Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya's commentary, the first commentary on the Gita. All other commentaries are later works, really speaking. So that means projection of Gita as a universal spiritual classic, and again giving a philosophical meaning to Vedic literature. If I make this statement, some of you may think it's an exaggeration. Vedas do contain very profound spiritual philosophical ideas. But these ideas were not recognized for what they are, really speaking. Before Shankara, before he wrote the commentaries on 10 Upanishads, some of the Upanishads are, most of the Upanishads represent together the 4 Vedas. For example, Brihadaranyaka from Yajurveda tradition, Chandogya from Samaveda tradition, Aitareya from Rigveda tradition, Mandukya from Atharvaveda tradition. Like that, there are 10 Upanishads from all the 4 Vedas. Now, he picked up these 10 Upanishads representing all the 4 Vedas, and then he built a commentary, he built a philosophical system on it. What we call today Advaita today is nothing but a philosophical system. Remember, Advaita tradition doesn't belong to Shankara. It is pre-Shankarite. It is as old as the Rigveda, which is maybe 7,000 years old, the oldest available human document on spiritual life is Rigveda Samhita. Rigveda Samhita itself contains all the profound Vedantic, Vedic ideas. But at the same time, transforming these Vedantic ideas into a compact philosophical system, a metaphysical system, giving it epistemology and giving it logic. Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Sabda, Arthabhata, and Upalabdhi, all the Pramana Shastras, mean the epistemological tools for Vedanta were supplied by Shankaracharya. So what he did, he built a philosophical system, a compact philosophical system. And then he says another important contribution, and with this I shall conclude because there's not enough time to give justice to a very profound subject. One important misunderstanding about Shankara's Advaita philosophy is very common. Advaita tells you the world is not real. Advaita tells you that I am not standing here right now. You are not sitting on the chair right now. Advaita tells you this is not St. Louis. Absolute craziness. Advaita doesn't say that. Now, Shankaracharya, he talks about 3 layers of reality, 3 levels of reality. The absolute reality, Paramarthika Satta, the Vyavaharika reality, the empirical reality of common sense experience, and the Pradibhasika reality, the conceptual reality. I shall just say a few things about this. About the Paramarthika reality, the transcendental eternal reality, we all know very well. It is something that cannot be explained, can only be experienced. It was never born because it never ceased to exist. It never dies, it will never cease to exist. It never grows because it remains unchanging. So it is called, it is called Sadvikara Atida, beyond the 6 changes. Jayade, Asti, Vardhade, Viparinamade, Apakshiyade, Vinashyati. Something that is born. Birth is a transformation from a state of empirical non-existence to a state of empirical existence. Then it stays for some time, it grows, it evolves, it decays and disappears, dies out. 6 changes. Shankaracharya says there is only one reality that is beyond all these changes. It always existed, it will always exist without any change. It is experienced as the same in the triple levels of consciousness, that is the state of waking, dream and deep sleeps. It always remains the same. Okay, that's perfectly understood, the transcendental reality. It's not the same as thing in itself as understood by Kant in Critique of Pure Reason. It is the absolute reality. It is not unknowable. It can be known as an experience, but it cannot be known as an explanation. So remember, this is an important thing. People foolishly equate Brahman as Kant's thing in itself. Kant's thing in itself is unknown and unknowable, but Vedantic truth, the Paramarthika realities, it is unknown to the senses, but very much known as our own real being. Yet Sakshat Aparoksha means it is very remote. It cannot be known as a sensory perception, but it can be experienced as our own essence, our inner being. The problem is with Vyavaharika Sata, the empirical reality. So Shankaracharya says, Jagat Mithya, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. The problem is this statement, Jagat Mithya. What he says is, everything in this world is subject to changes. So it is not absolutely real, but it's never absolutely unreal. It is not absolutely unreal because we experience it, we feel it, we are part of this world. We cannot deny this world away. We are part of this world and we experience, we are within this world. But at the same time, we know every minute our body changes, our mind also changes, our intellects also undergo changes. Even the entire cosmos will change. If you think in terms of billions of years, the universe doesn't remain stable without change. It always changes. So anything that is subject to changes, any kind of modification, is not absolutely real with capital letter R. But it is not absolutely unreal. This is an important point, remember. So, what Shankara said is something that we all know. If a child will laugh at you, if you say, look here, you'll have the same height and weight for 25 years. Child knows that after 10 years, you'll be much taller and heavier and bigger. Everyone knows. So also, even the mic system I'm using right now here will not be the same after 100 years, after 50 years. Maybe 10 years ago, it was part of the iron ore that came from the earth, down to earth. So the point is, anything that is subject to changes is not absolutely unreal, but not absolutely real, because what is absolutely real should remain without any change in the past, present and future. So it cannot come into existence because it always exists. It cannot cease to exist because it always exists. It cannot change or it cannot evolve because it remains the same. So that's what Shankaracharya said. Shankaracharya's Advaita is pure common sense. If you really understand Advaita, you can go ahead doing your work in your everyday. You are working in the university, suddenly you get the news, you lose your job next month. You should not stop working for a new job, but you should not collapse because you are going to lose the job, because you know losing the job is part of this experience in this world. Your money, banks may collapse, stock markets may collapse, you may lose money. No need for disappointment, because money is supposed to disappear. Banks are supposed to collapse. It's part of the world. The world is subject to changes. So actually, Advaita, Shankaracharya's Advaita, apart from very profound metaphysical system, it has got an everyday common sense application. For a housewife working in a kitchen, for a professor, the same lady may be teaching in a university, then also it is an application. Every day, every minute, we know what Advaita teaches you, but we forget it. So, Shankaracharya only wants to remind you what you already know intimately, what you are already experiencing, but you are not able to translate into simple common sense that can be a guide to our everyday life. And in modern times, the Swami Vivekananda, who actually took this Advaita as interpreted by Sri Ramakrishna to modern times, it's just like gold and currency. If you want to buy something from Trader Joe's, you cannot carry a bulk of big mass of gold. You may be caught by the police. For that, you need a credit card or maybe American currency. You need. So Advaita is gold. Shankaracharya's Advaita is gold. But in modern times, Sri Ramakrishna taught using illustrations and examples from modern life, and Swami Vivekananda interpreting Advaita in the language of our own times. In an age where religion was facing a lot of criticism as being unscientific and anti-humanistic, especially in Europe, 19th century, Swami Vivekananda brought this Advaita to America. And he interpreted it in a language and vocabulary that we all understand, can apply. So in essence, Advaita is simple, pure common sense. It is Shankaracharya who gave it a profound, metaphysical, philosophical shape and form. So thank you. I'm very grateful to Swamiji for inviting me. I was supposed to come maybe 2 years ago, but it had been cancelled because of the lockdown. So thank you, my pranam, Swamiji. Namaskar. Thank you. Namaskar.
We have heard a very profound and a scholarly lecture by Swami Tattwamayananda. He is a very learned and a scholarly monk of our order. And he was coming from Kerala, where Shankara was born. And he can speak in Sanskrit also. He is a Sanskrit scholar. And he presented Shankara's contribution to the world thought very precisely and very methodically. We are very grateful to the Swami for accepting our invitation. And Swami and will sit in the library and you can ask him some questions. And today is Shankara's birth anniversary. We offer some rice pudding. Please go to the library. And now I shall have to go to the Zoom to answer questions of our devotees, those who are out of town, various parts of the world. So please go and ask some questions and Swami will be very glad to talk to you. Thank you. And please give us a few minutes time to set up our Zoom. Thank you very much.